walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing shall ever grow old. In that beautiful land, on the faraway strand, no storms with their blast ever frown. The street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun it shall never go down. There are evergreen trees that been blowing in the breeze, and their fruitage is brighter than gold. There the throne of God stands in the fairest of lands, and nothing shall ever grow old. In that beautiful land, on the faraway strand, no storms with their blast ever frown. The street, I am told, is paved.
All right, so we're talking about the Revelation of John. We looked last week at chapter 15, which is kind of the prelude to the bowls of judgment. So the bowls of judgment have been introduced, but before that happens, some things have to take place. There are those who come through testing, who come out victorious. That is to say that they've been purified through the testing. We're talking about the preaching of the gospel. We're talking about people who are washed, people who are in Christ, I guess is another way we can put it. They then sing the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. We talked about that last week. We connected the Song of Moses to the Song of Moses, the original Song of Moses that was sung after they were delivered through. Anybody remember? What was the first Song of Moses sung? They were delivered out of bondage and passed through the Red Sea, and when they got to the other side, they sang the Song of Moses. There is a clear connection between what happens to us in salvation and those events. They are set forth as a shadow throughout the scriptures, and so we need to make that same connection here. So we actually looked at some of our modern hymns that make reference to these things as well last week. We're not going to redo last week's lesson, so we're not going to break all that down this morning. But what I do want to point out to is what it says in verse 5, because that's important. After these things. And so we're not being given a hard timeline. We're saying after all of the folks are delivered. And we're going to talk about this actually, interestingly enough, a little bit in the sermon this morning, about God's patience waiting for people. God is exercising that patience right now. This process is going on right now. It is not until this process is over that the ultimate judgment, the complete judgment, is going to be rendered. And so that's what we're being told. After these things I looked, and the temple of the tabernacle testimony of heaven was open. The 7 angels who had the 7 plagues came out of the temple, clothed in linen, clean and bright, girded around their breasts with golden girdles. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. The temple was filled with the smoke from the glory of God and from his power. We talked about that last week, about how every time that the presence of God is known, there is the same sense of power and smoke and the things associated with it. The mountain when the law was given, that's what happened. When the temple was dedicated that Solomon built, that's what happened. That's what's described here. No one was able to enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. And so you're not going to get into the temple yet until these things are finished. And I think that there's 2 ways that we could look at that, and we'll just let the text develop. And we might revisit that later. And so we're dealing with chapter 16 and the revelation of God regarding these things. And so I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the 7 angels, "Go and pour out the 7 bowls of the wrath of God onto the earth." So we're going to have a breakdown of these 7 bowls. Now, again, here's this imagery of 7. This has happened over. We had the 7 scrolls. We have the 7 trumpets. Now we have the 7 bowls. What does 7 always indicate? Perfection, completeness. And so all of the wrath of God is going to be poured out here. And the difference between what's being talked about here and what has been talked about earlier in some of those other things was that it was always specified in those texts that this affected a third, or this affected a half, or this affected... In other words, they were measured judgments against specific things. This is portrayed as a more universal and more broad type of judgment. The first angel went, poured out his bowl into the earth. Now, we've looked at some of these other things as well, and I'm just going to kind of skip through some of these verses and point this out. This is a recurring thing here in the book of Revelation about these judgments. We have verse 2, a reference to the earth, it being poured out to the earth. Verse 4, this bowl is poured out to the rivers. Verse 8, this bowl is poured out to the sun. Verse 10, the throne of the beast and the kingdom is darkened. Verse 12, that's where I'm looking for. The 6th angel into the great river Euphrates. We'll talk about that some in a moment. But we're covering all of the thing. Land, sea, waters, the same kind of imagery. so that we understand that this affects not just a small area, but this affects what? All of creation. It even includes the sun. So that we understand that we're talking, the breadth of what we're talking about here. It's important, I think, to understand why God in his revelation goes out of his way to point this out all the time. And it's because of the way that people believe and act that we see, for instance, in the book of Jonah. What did Jonah initially try to do? He tried to run away. He tried to go to Tarshish instead of be there in Israel or go where God told him to go. What was he going to accomplish by going to Tarshish? By going the opposite direction of where God told him to go. What was he going to accomplish? Well, the only thing he could possibly be hoping to accomplish is the same thing that we try to accomplish when we run away from a wasp or a bear or a person. Why are we running away from them? What do? We don't ever run toward them, do we?
No.
We run the opposite direction, which is exactly what Jonah did. And what are we trying to do? You get away from their influence, get away from their power, get too far away for them to do anything. Over and over, we're reminded in the Bible that God's reach is not limited like that. When Paul preached in Athens, he had to explain to the Greeks of Athens why the Hebrew God mattered to them. So he began his sermon by saying what? The God who made the world and everything in it doesn't dwell in houses made by hands. That